All right, so I'm on this refined color layer, and this is where I'm really starting to decide, without getting too detailed too early, trying to decide where the light sources are. And I like that her photo here and her self-portrait sculpture are kind of lit from the same angle. That can help to inform me. And I'm doing this at a 70% opacity, kind of mixing different full spectrum shadow tones into her face on this side, into her cheek, into her neck, and then every once in a while stealing colors from myself because I'm using this lower opacity to help blend them. And depending on the level of finish you want, this is what you can spend a long time doing, kind of working between the colors you've already put down, smoothing them out, placing them just so, getting the level of detail you expect. Remember, it's very helpful that I have the brush preset setting of shape dynamics, so I can work smaller to larger just with my pin pressure. Now this is a good tip when you're doing the eyes, because it's easy to want to focus on the eyes pretty soon. Don't work on one individually without being able to see both of them, because you're always balancing them so that they feel like they're looking and working together believably. Because if the eyes are ever kind of off, we'll feel it in terms of if they don't feel like they are looking at the same place, or if one's really sized differently than the other one. So you want to work both eyes at the same time if you can. So this is showing you just a really straightforward, hands-on way of digital painting. Just choosing the colors yourself, taking them from your reference, and applying them on. This is not painting over the photo, and that's what's called rotoscoping, because this allows you to have a lot more of your own personal expression in the work. Notice how this doesn't match up exactly with either of these, but it's kind of taking different impressions from them. And I'm happier with that solution to things. I want to put a little bit more yellow in that same way. I don't need to be faithful to colors or to textures. I can really find my own. And I don't need to be faithful to the lighting, and I can find my own solutions within some of those parameters I've set up. There are some tools that Photoshop makes available for other methods that you'll see tutorials about, and they've gotten better and better. But they're mostly tools for kind of, I don't want to say cheating, but making rotoscoping easier. And so one of those tools is what's called the mixer brush. And if you work on top of a photo, let's say this image, and I use the mixer brush, I'll have to go to a lot smaller just because it's a much lower resolution image. What you can do is you can set the mixer brush to have kind of different orientations of how it handles the color. And the way it works, if you say sample all layers, is you can make a new blank layer above, use the mixer brush, set it to one of these settings or a custom setting. You know, right now it's set at whatever I used last, which was wet 80%, the load 75%, the mix 90%. So what that means is it's going to pick up 75% of the color from the pixels underneath on a layer below. And then it's going to mix them 90% with the with the colors around it, and it's going to mix that with a softening of about 80%. And so I'm painting, it doesn't look like I'm doing anything, but when I turn off that layer, you'll see that I'm painting, picking up the pixels from underneath and turning them into paint. Maybe that would make more sense if I put a layer of white in between. Or even better yet, gray. So how does that work? So I'm on the mixer brush and I just kind of paint. And it's picking up all of its color selections from the pixels underneath. And then it's kind of automatically mixing them depending on the direction I'm using the brush in different ways. But basically, it's just going to be blurring and smudging it together. I think of this like these books I had as a kid that were like paint by number books, but the paint was already embedded in the page, like little dots. And then all you did was use a wet brush, and you just mix that into the page, and you got the color. So that's kind of what this does. So then at the end of the day, I can have my painting like this, using the mixer brush. Now it can be a great way to get started, but it takes too much from the original, in my opinion. But it's a really fun tool to play with once you understand how. Now if I use the mixer brush on my own painting here, like on a layer above, it's not going to make a whole lot of sense, but I could use it to smooth things. So basically if I wanted to play with wetting all of this and blending it together with more medium, I'm doing this on a new layer just to show you, and wanted an effect that was smoother and more like really worked over oil paint instead of the more kind of ceramic glaze look I'm going for. The mixer brush with these settings is not a bad way to go. So I'll show you that difference. It's going to make her look kind of airbrushed and soft. But this is working off of my own choices, my own strokes. It's basically pouring turpentine on your painting and then using a brush to try to save it. But it's a way of kind of automatizing some of the things I'm showing you with refined painting, of choosing colors that are similar. So I don't like that effect as much, personally, but let me show you the difference. So that is what the mixer brush does, and without anything else, that's what the mixer brush painted. But I feel if you just put it down yourself with conviction, you can find all those edges. The mixer brush is not good at hard edges unless you use all dry brush settings. But sometimes that can be helpful. So I can use that mixer brush layer and then blend it in very, very subtly if I just need a little bit more smoothness there. And of course I can erase from it too, selectively, especially where the hard edges are, if I want that smoothness. But in this case I don't want it. So I'll call that a mixer brush experiment layer. But back to just the refined color. It's very much like just stealing colors from yourself. Come on. Up on the eraser. Very much like just stealing colors from yourself and then painting them in. You can get that smoothness as well. Especially if you use the wet edges. Now then the next problem with digital painting is very similar to regular painting. You have to know when to stop, when you've done enough in an area, when you've gotten to what you've worked for. And so that's why I like to look at the whole picture as much as possible, so I don't get caught up in little details of just one section, because that can be disastrous. When you lose sight of how it all comes together. In the class tutorials, I have different types of digital paintings each semester that are shown there. And if you're going for something kind of very smooth and airbrushy, I did one of Paris Hilton as Barbie. That kind of is painted in that style. That might be useful for you to look at. I have others that are more like watercolor. This one's more kind of caked on like ceramic. So, but it's not because I want you to imitate something I do. I want you to find a method that you really enjoy. And I want you to be free to experiment. Now, it doesn't take much to soften an expression. I have her looking pretty stern there, but if I just kind of upturn the shadows at the corners of her mouth, it will soften that. So she'll look a little bit more approachable. Though she doesn't have an overall very approachable look. So I'm not overemphasizing that. I think she made her self-portrait look far more approachable than she comes across in real life. She's an imposing figure. Now for her neck, remember the advantage of digital painting is using full spectrum, so using warm to cool. So to get her neck really to separate from her head, I'm going to use a lot more of these cool colors, even for the highlights. And I'll try to accent her face with some of these yellowish oranges in selective spots to help enliven the color. So this is what full spectrum does. Even though we have that general flat color underneath, the full spectrum can really round it out, play with the lighting, make it more engaging, and make it more your own personal choices. Put a little bit of that in her upper lip too. Turn it back. Remember, I'm only at 70%, so everything I'm doing is using the layers underneath somewhat to help define it. I'm just really trying not to be safe with it. I'm just trying to still make bold decisions, not get too focused on tiny details. It's really easy to do.